Welcome back, everyone. I always like to start off class if I can with a little bit of good. We have so much negativity in the world. I want to introduce you all to my nephew James. You got this picture of him recently. He's about to be 1 year old, and that is very exciting. And also, just I don't like it because I've only met him once because of the timing of the whole COVID thing. He was born last September. We saw him at Christmas, Mrs. Parker and I, and not since. And I wish we could just go up there, but they live in Colorado. It's my sister's boy. Uh, but anyway, that's James. So we are looking at pluralism, elitism, and others, and other things, and the principles of democracy. This is kind of a shorter lesson. I wouldn't be surprised, although don't take it to the bank if this is done in just one recording. So, pluralist theory. Again, the theory that political power is distributed among a wide array of diverse and competing interest groups. So everybody has a voice. Everybody that wants one is able to petition the government, go up to Congress. Who knows? Maybe talk to the president if there's enough influence there. The NRA, the National Rifle Association, is a notable example of an interest group that comes to mind. APAC, the American Israeli Political Action Committee. They're a very powerful group. Obviously, given the name, it advocates for the state of Israel. And the NAACP as well. Truman, and you don't need to remember that name. Just again, I credit the scholars that I get this information from, as you should too, in your written work and videos to me, and your other classes in your college career. Says that these interest groups, the NRA, APAC, the NAACP, the largest interest group in America, representing the largest amount of people, by and large, is the AARP, the American Association of Retired People. That's the largest interest group, undoubtedly the largest voting bloc of people in the United States. So that's just kind of a thing. The older people tend to vote more than younger people. So Truman, whose name you don't need to remember, says these interest groups form through disturbance theory. Now, what is disturbance theory? Glad you asked. I'll tell you if you wanted to know or not. So disturbance theory says groups form as a result of changes in the political system. So right now, we're going into a presidential election year. Trump versus Biden versus Jorgensen versus Hawkins versus whoever else is on the ballot. I'm sure I'm forgetting somebody. Anyway, Trump, Republicans, traditionally, and I'm generalizing, are in favor of guns. They are advocates of the National Rifle Association, an interest group I mentioned on the last slide. They are great believers in the Second Amendment, all those things. So maybe, and I'm just theorizing here. I'm not saying, I'm not doing anything more than just spitballing. Maybe if Trump supporters are afraid that Biden will win the election in 2020, they will maybe join the NRA and give it more of a voice and more power and buy guns and ammunition. So because what's the disturbance? Trump is out of office, Biden comes into office. And again, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm just theorizing. So Truman says this way, everything that's worth being represented, really gets represented in our government, mainly the Congress. So, whatever the people care about, whatever they can coalesce around in terms of an issue, and provide representation to the government. They should be allowed to have a voice and be heard by their representatives and senators, and maybe again, if you can get in to see the president, the president. The Supreme Court obviously does not deal with this sort of stuff. So the government, and the forum in which Truman is referring is the U.S. Congress, because that's where the whopping majority of this stuff takes place in terms of interest groups and meetings and things of that nature. So elitist theory says that American politics is run by a very wealthy few. The 1% of recent years, that has come out in recent years, thanks to movements like Bernie Sanders drawing attention to that. But they say that that there's a generalization that nearly all political power is held by a relatively small and wealthy group of people that share similar values and interests and have the same last names, funnily enough. Like, if you think back a little bit, Vanderbilt, Rockefeller, Kennedy, Bush, and they come from a similar privileged sort of background. So most of the top leaders, they say, these elitist theory advocates say, they're recruited from the same small social group. And this is, if you've never heard the term WASP, this is a good moment to bring that up. The social group that is being referred to, white Anglo-Saxon Protestants, typically men, but that's the social group they're looking at. So the elite theorists really emphasize the degree that these corporate and foundation directorates and their frequent social interactions tend to link together and coordinate between the top leaders in business, government, et cetera, et cetera. So business and government and other sectors, both private and public, will come together. They will make sure that things get done because they are the voices that really matter, that only matter, so say people who prescribe to the elite theory of government. So the power elite can really dictate the main goals over anything that's really important in governmental policymaking because they control the economic resources of these major businesses and financial resources in the country. And I think there's a grain of, well, not a grain, but there is a truth in that. Whoever does control resources, water, oil, access to electricity, the essentials, in other words, can really set the agenda. It's a little bit of a frightening thought, but it's one that you should be aware of. So the power that these people have is because of A, the resources they control, and B, their positions within these companies, these corporations, the big ones, Walmart, Target, places like those. Doesn't really depend on their ability to get the masses to support them through efforts to represent the interests of broader social groups. Why? Well, they have the money to buy ads. They have the money to rent out billboards. They have the money to do internet ads, things like that. They don't have to appeal to voters necessarily, the way that smaller time candidates, like in this election cycle, Joe Jorgensen and Howie Hawkins do, because Trump wealthier than, well, most of us, most all of the nation probably. Biden has the name recognition. He has the celebrity, which is another thing will come up, and that'll come up in a moment. So they don't, necessarily have to do the massive sort of outreach. So elite theorists, and again, none of this is being purported as fact. These are just theories, again, about how the government is run, about how the government could be run, that are in the curriculum for this course that the college asks that I put in front of you. So elite theorists, they say, they'll differ amongst themselves on questions as how open the power elite is to new blood, new money, the exact degree of agreement or disagreement that usually prevails within its ranks, and the degree of genuine concern or lack thereof for the broader public welfare that enters into the choices of public policy goals. So we can see that now with the current occupant of the White House, and any occupant of the White House really, how does their socioeconomic status, this would be a great research paper if any of you are looking for an idea. How does the socioeconomic status of the occupant of the Oval Office affect his, and hopefully her one day, his choices of public policy goals to pursue? That'd be a good research paper. My hunch would be probably the socioeconomic status plays into it a great deal. And the more money somebody has, the less they're probably genuinely concerned and just more likely pay lip service to people's needs and what they want in terms of a public policy agenda. That would be my hunch, but you'd have to research that. So all these theorists really share the idea that there are just a few thousand real movers and shakers who run the United States, determine the basic direction of public policy, and it's certainly not, the likes of you and me who, we've got $5 in our pocket, we're kind of sort of making rent. We might have some trouble paying for medication, groceries, depending on the week. It's certainly not us, say the elite theorists, that are choosing, among candidates come election time. It's the people in the proverbial smoke-filled back room, if you will. So there are other theories to discuss. There's a traditional democratic theory. So this is, I asked you if democracy was dead. Many of you chose not to do that homework assignment. But, the people have the majority of power and control the government by electing officials and representatives. Okay, a majoritarian form of government, traditional democratic theory. I'd recognize that in the United States. I recognize this also. I recognize pluralism. So is it one theory that's really more dominant? Well, that's a question. That is a question. Ooh, Flipgrid assignment coming up. So is there really one theory that stands out, as working more or better in the United States than the others? I don't know. I think it's a mix of all of them, really. Bureaucratic theory. Max Weber, you don't, again, have to remember the name. So there's a structure and standardized procedures, modern governments that allow bureaucrats to carry out the day-to-day function and workings of the government to hold the real power over public policy. There's a lot of truth to that, too. How much do you think the governor of Illinois, J.B. Pritzker, is actually deciding or implementing or putting into effect day by day? I mean, a fair amount, but the volume of stuff that comes out of Springfield, um, certainly not all of it is approved by him, or he even is aware of a lot of it. It's just because the government has gotten so big that these unelected people, his appointees, and this is the same, on the national level, Trump's appointees uh, hold, the real power. They're making the decision. Unless there's a big problem uh, over something, Trump is not going to interfere in State Department policy necessarily, or Treasury policy. I mean, it's just it can't work that way. He's got other things he needs to be thinking about. Governor Pritzker does as well. So yeah, this theory really holds some weight as well. And then there's hyperpluralism, which says democracy is a system of many groups having so much strength that government is often pulled in numerous directions at the same time, causing gridlock and ineffectiveness. And I recognize this in the United States too. I mean, we go back to what we were talking about with the interest groups a few minutes before. We've got the NRA, we've got the NAACP, or the American Civil Liberties Union is a more prominent one at the moment. Um, People shouldn't have guns. Yes, they should. It causes gridlock because there are literally countless numbers of people on either side of that particular debate. Should women be allowed to have abortions? That is another deeply divisive topic. Uh, but there are so many groups that have or want to have input on those particular issues, not just those two that I named, but others, many others, that maybe Congress maybe gets a little stopped up trying to decide what's best, who to listen to, what's going to piss off their voters the least, um, things like that. So is the country strictly elitist? Does the country strictly follow the pluralism theory, or these three, which, I mean, by the way, will certainly be on the exam. I mean, I've asked students in the past. Some of them have really seen one theory and argued that. Others have seen a combination of all five, or some, and there have been people in between. I mean, there's no right or wrong answer to this. So, what is a democracy? Aristotle says it's the rule of the many. Now, there is an inherent problem in that. It's called the 80-20 rule. All right. So you have two options. 80% of the people want option A. 20% of the people want option B. In a country of, I stand to be corrected, in a country of 330 million people, well, 20% of the country that wants option B isn't a number that should be scoffed at. So how does democracy protect minority rights? How can a democracy look at and defend those people who might disagree with the 80. That's not a question I can answer for you. That's something you have to think about for yourself. But again, majority rule, 50% plus one vote gets you elected into office. That's just the way of it. And there are two types of democracies. We have a direct democracy, which is pure. We have an indirect democracy. This is what we're operating with, the indirect. Where'd the mouse go? The indirect democracy. So a direct democracy would not work in this country or any other country, really, that has any sort of sizable population, because what is a condition for a direct democracy? All or most of the citizens participate directly in either holding office or making policy or laws. Well, could 330 million people reasonably be expected to hold office or participate in making laws on a daily basis directly? No, obviously not. We get into a situation there of there being, too many chiefs and not enough Indians. Very small towns do this sometimes. I mean, I worked in one small town at a school. I ran its bus fleet, and the mayor of the town was a bus driver also, and he drove buses for me. So, it can happen, and it does, but the population sample we're talking about is a few thousand people or less, preferably less, for that to really work. So what we have, oh, never mind, jump the gun. So people in a direct democracy really directly make laws and govern themselves. So that we make all the decisions for ourselves. In large populations or countries, again, can't have this. We can't have this. China can't have this. Russia can't have it. Well, I suppose we could, but we wouldn't do, anything else. There'd be no one to grow crops or fix the potholes or teach the children or do anything that we need done. The founding fathers really didn't like an idea of a direct democracy because, and this, there we go. This shouldn't be taken as a slam against people back then, but it was just the way of it that most of our forebears couldn't afford or didn't have the resources to or didn't live in proximity to a school. It wasn't readily available education like it is today. I'm quite literally in your home right now, and I'm sitting in my home. I mean, this is so accessible. It would be unbelievable even to students and teachers of 15, 20 years ago. So, the people, not, they were not educated. They didn't have what we have. They didn't have the internet. You didn't have access to information at your fingertips. You didn't have all these things. So, yeah, direct democracy probably wouldn't have worked because the country wouldn't have long survived a bunch of people, a bunch of citizens who didn't know what was necessarily happening running it. Now you can say, and I certainly would agree with you, that that is what we have today. But what can you do? I didn't write the rules here. Neither did any of you. So very time consuming, again, and this is the problem. Most citizens don't have the time, information, interest, or expertise to make these reasonable choices or political decisions. That was my wife in the background. That's all right.
I really thought I was ducky where you couldn't see me.
No, no. Uh, and even really very highly educated people. I'm going to erase that. Very highly educated people could be manipulated by demagogic leaders who play on people's fears and prejudices. And I'll leave you to draw your own conclusions about that one. So direct democracy examples today. Sometimes we'll have referendums. Congress or the state legislature will submit a proposed law to a popular vote, and you and I will go in and say yay or nay to it. One in my town, when I voted in the primaries, was having to do with raising our taxes to pay for repairs to the courthouse in the town square. They decided to leave that up to us. Citizens initiative, citizens write and submit a proposed law to a popular vote by the citizens during an election after obtaining a required number of signatures. So these two things I would definitely know the difference in and count on seeing them on the test. So people take the initiative and write the bill themselves, and that's just a way to maybe remember it. These might also be referred to as propositions or ballot measures. So what are some examples of propositions? Well, in the last decade, medical marijuana was a big one. Let's see, Arizona had Proposition 203, which was tied just about. California wanted to legalize it and got a majority. States will have different rules on what constitutes passage of a referendum, which is why I'm not saying it passed or it didn't pass, because just sitting right here right now, I am unsure of California, Arizona, and Rhode Island. Well, we can assume that this one didn't pass. The state name change. So the full name of Rhode Island, if you're interested, is Rhode Island and the Providence Plantations. So they wanted to get rid of the Providence Plantation part of Rhode Island and just Rhode Island. And I don't think most of the people probably knew that lived in Rhode Island. A student a couple of years ago told me that was the full name of the state. But that was resoundingly defeated. I don't know. I've always explained that away as if people didn't know what the full name of the state actually was, or they wanted to preserve history, or whatever is going on. So same-sex marriage was also a big thing in this last decade. They wanted to allow it, 53-47 yes. And again, legalizing marijuana in Washington state. Most of the population, a majority of the population, wanted to. So indirect democracies are something I will come to in a part 2 of this video.